so much for joining us. As it was mentioned, we'll be talking about a case study that we have been partnering together on that is virtual reality, using virtual reality to increase disease awareness for healthcare providers. But first, a couple of introductions of who we are. I'm Brittany Gilbert-DeMarco, the Director of Experiential Strategy at Tipping Point Media. At TPM, we primarily work with the life sciences and pharmaceutical industries to help them build custom content for their training and marketing needs. My role is to oversee all of the XR simulation and serious game solutions that we create, and we've been partnering with AbbVie for the last 4 years to help them build various VR solutions.
And I'm Weston Pack. I'm the Associate Scientific Director of Ophthalmology at Allergan, which is part of the AbbVie family of companies. I work in what's called the U.S. Medical Affairs Department, so we're really focused on scientific messaging. We meet a lot with physicians, whether they're ophthalmologists or optometrists. We meet with scientists and really communicate information about disease state like we're going to be talking about today. In particular, I manage a team of what are called MSLs, or Medical Science Liaisons. These are people that have PhDs or a PharmD or an MD, or sometimes even have an OD, which is the optometry degree. And they go out and, like I said, they talk to the doctors in the field, ask them questions, whether it's about our products or just something in disease state in general. So I oversee the interviewing, hiring, training of those teams, and then, of course, just their interactions out in the field. So we'll talk about how the MSL team in particular has been utilizing the VR suite that we've developed with coordinating with, excuse me, with Tipping Point Media as an educational tool out there to talk about science and medicine.
So as Weston said, we're going to be looking at specifically a case study of VR in the pharmaceutical industry, particularly AbbVie's latest expansion to this suite of VR resources that they've been using with the MSLs. It focuses on an eye condition called presbyopia, or age-related degeneration of the eye. And with eye care, VR's unique capabilities really is beneficial because you can create these scenarios, perspectives, situations that are either very difficult or impossible to recreate in real life. And those experiences provide healthcare providers with this brand new way of looking at the content. And we're gonna go over specifically with the Presbyopia app, how we did this to increase disease awareness as well as build patient empathy with our audience. So where did something like this start? Well, as I mentioned, we've been working with AbbVie to build VR solutions for the last 4 years, so it all started in 2018. You can probably tell from our first VR app, we're using the 2-sensor setup for the Oculus Rift. But it was actually for the rheumatology department for the initial use case. It was meant as just this one-time tool in trade show booths to increase booth traffic. So what we wanted to do was engage customers through the content by giving them, as I mentioned, this brand new way to look at the science and literally see through the eyes of the patient. And with the content, with this engagement, this would then lead to these conversations with AbbVie reps after the experience and have these deeper scientific conversations. Well, the storytelling, this VR method of storytelling resonated so well with customers that AbbVie saw an opportunity to leverage the VR technology in other use cases, mainly with their medical science liaisons as a tool for out in the field. And they also saw this opportunity to go outside of rheumatology and go into different therapeutic areas with the VR content, namely eye care, and that's where Weston's team came in.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so the MSLs use these tools, the software suite that we've developed, largely at medical conferences. So, you know, if you go to one of the big medical conferences, not too different from what's going on here. Yeah, not every company, but you know, companies have booths where, in the case of AbbVie, we have like a sort of a commercial booth, and then we have this separate, sort of called the medical booth, which is the medical booth. We just focus on the science, education. It's not about products, it's not about promotion, it has nothing to do with sales, it's just all about the science and the medicine. So we've been utilizing the virtual reality suite at a number of congresses, and there are many in ophthalmology as well as optometry throughout the course of the year. I probably go to 12 or maybe 15. So stay very busy. But it's typically the people that are coming to the booth are physicians, like I say, ODs or MDs, sometimes some of the technicians that work and see patients on a day-to-day basis. And so they'll come to the booth and we'll talk about, like I say, the science, the method, in this case, the disease state presbyopia. So we've used, obviously, this as a tool to educate particularly younger presbyopes. We'll talk about presbyopia in the next slide in a second, not go into too much detail, but we're utilizing this to train even our own MSLs who sometimes join the company without any background in eye care. And then also, of course, like what's frequently done out in the field actually outside of the congresses is in the doctor's offices. A lot of the younger clinical staff are too young to have experienced presbyopia at that point in life. They may not even know what it is. They know patients come into the clinic with some symptoms and kind of how to treat it. But this gives them the experience to actually see what it's like, the debilitating conditions of presbyopia, to have that better perspective on what the patient's dealing with.
So let's talk about presbyopia.
Yeah, so I won't go into too much of the scientific detail here. This is an image actually from the VR activity. But presbyopia is very common. Everybody in this room is going to get it at some point. It happens just as part of the natural aging process. Basically what happens is the lens, which you see towards the front of the eye here in the diagram, gets hardened over time, largely due to UVA and UVB radiation exposure. And so what happens is usually like around the ages of 40 to 45, people start noticing it's very hard to read things up close. So looking at a nutrition label, reading a newspaper. Intermediate vision is also affected, so people like it impedes people's ability to use a computer in an office setting environment. So basically what's happening is that lens has gotten hardened, so it's no longer able to really focus the light, or refract is the optical term we use, right on the back of the retina, which is basically like a photodetector array. Neurons and things and parts goes back to the brain. But what happens in presbyopia is that focusing power is lost because the lens has gotten much harder. And so what you'll see is kind of what's shown up here on the slide is that focal point where the image is going to be in focus normally is actually behind the eye. And so if you go out and you get reading glasses, per se, the goal of reading glasses is to increase the refractive power so that focal point moves forward. Again, like I said before, most eye care physicians, opticians, people that see patients, they know what presbyopia is. They don't always understand the full etiology of what causes it and what's going on in the eye. But many of them, particularly those that are, say, under 45, have not experienced presbyopia yet. So it's hard for them to really grasp what the patient is dealing with. So optometrists and ophthalmologists, like I said, are kind of our main target audience, if you will, in some sense. They see hundreds of patients every week. They're very busy doctors. I mean, all doctors are busy, but optometrists and ophthalmologists in particular are known for seeing a lot of patients. And so it's really hard to get time with them, certainly in their clinics. We don't do like sort of cold calling thing where we just show up in their office and be like, hey, can I meet with the doctor? No, everything's on schedules and there's a process to go through so that we're not being invasive. But again, these sort of conversations that happen in the clinic are usually very brief, right? You get in there, maybe the doctor will give you 3 to 5 minutes to be like, okay, yeah, tell me about the latest science. I heard something from your clinical trials, some new data that came out, something was presented at Congress that I'm interested in. So again, one of the goals and the functions of the medical science liaisons is to not only have the educational conversations with the doctors, but also to bring insights back, whether it's about an existing product or about a disease state or something what we call unmet need, which is there's a condition out there that maybe there are some existing therapies for it, whether it's a drug or something like glasses, a medical device. Their goal and responsibility is to bring those insights back to us so that we can then figure out, okay, this is the market for I need a drug or a therapy, and then we'll take things internally and try and figure out long-term strategy within our ophthalmology team. So in order to really address this need for educating the doctors, I would say more importantly sometimes educating some of their staff as far as visiting them in their clinical practices. We included some obviously educational modules, so looking at disease state. We'll show you some examples of that in a little bit, but we also incorporated a lot of engaging activities, right? So we have an archery task where you're wearing bifocals, which are typically sometimes the first line of therapy for treating presbyopia, where again, there's basically 2 different lenses in a pair of glasses. One's for reading things up close, and the other gives you whatever distance correction you need. So there's that aspect of it where you can capture struggles that people actually deal with the existing therapies, such as using glasses or Monovision contacts, which I'll highlight in a minute. But we also can do a very accurate simulation of what's happening in terms of visual acuity. Visual acuity is how clear an image is. If you've ever had an eye exam, which I'm sure most people here probably have, It's like looking at the reading chart, or they call it an ETDRS chart, and assessing whether the letters are in clear, whether in focus, and whether you can identify them. So to capture the monovision, right, so I talked about the archery task with the bifocals, and then also we had a miniature golf activity we developed to really capture the challenges that are faced by people that use monovision. Monovision, I'll explain in more details a little bit. Basically, you have one eye corrected to see things up near, and then the other eye is corrected to see things in the distance. So as you can imagine, that creates challenges when you're trying to do an activity where they're utilizing the whole spectrum of vision from near to intermediate to distant.
So let's go through a little video to see how this Presbyopia app came together. Now, the first thing that the users get to experience when they start up the app is a very simplistic 360 rendering of a definition of what is presbyopia. And this was very intentional. We didn't want to overwhelm the users at first because a lot of VR users in the pharmaceutical space, this is their first time. So we want to make sure we acclimate them slowly at first.
Yep, and we also created kind of this little virtual environment. This is part of the disease state sort of training, if you will, but one of the first things that people do once they're in this immersive environment is they'll go and they'll just stick their head right in the middle of that eye, and they'll start looking around because they know the anatomy, they understand what's going on optically. They've never stuck their head inside an eye, right? It's always just using instruments. So, but what we've kind of captured here is simulation in terms of what's happening in the visual field in a presbyopic eye versus a non-presbyopic eye, and then kind of what's happening optically. So you can basically take in the ETDRS reading chart, bring it to the near vision, and then a presbyopic eye, you see that the focal point falls behind the retina, and of course you can see the blur that's applied on the actual reading chart that's very reflective of the real thing. So, and then we developed this cool tool, which I'm very happy with, which is sort of a visual acuity simulator, right? So we're not just adding a certain amount of blur here. This is like actual, like legit, detailed scientific calculations of what happens optically from presbyopia as you go from like minor severity to up to more advanced severity.
And we also simulated what it's like to wear these different types of corrective lenses. So you can see in the reading glasses challenge, when you put on your reading glasses, everything close to you is clear and everything in the background is blurry. When you take them off, the opposite kind of happens. And what we did here is we created a task in an office setting where they had to constantly switch between looking at their clipboard, where they would have to put on their glasses, but then have to look and check something on the whiteboard in the distance. They'd have to take off their glasses. So this on and off really demonstrated the daily struggles that someone who relies on reading glasses might have at their job. Now with bifocals, this one is a little bit different. As Weston mentioned before, this is a glass type of glasses that cuts the lens in half. When you look through the top, things in the foreground are blurry, but your distance vision is clear, and then the bottom corrects for near vision. And that's all clear. So what we did was we created a task where they had the opportunity to do some archery. Because archery, you kind of have to focus on something that is in the distance, but also at in the foreground at the same time, and it gets in the way because of this intersecting divisional line with the lenses. So there's a lot of like head movement that you need to do in order to focus correctly. And I know this was insightful for you, Weston, because you have archery experience.
Yeah, I enjoy archery myself. I do bow hunting and other things, but the physics and the way that Tipping Point has been able to really capture the experience of doing archery. I've never done it with bifocals in the field, but did a great job capturing that. But it's a lot of fun. There's a lot of engagement there. And then, like I said, this is the Monovision Golf Challenge. So again, Monovision is where you have one eye that's corrected to see things clearly in near, and the other eye that's basically corrected to see things in distance. And so it creates that, if it's severe enough, you actually have like loss of spatial vision. Not a chronic thing, just as long as you're using those corrective lenses. And so we thought, well, let's do like a mini golf challenge where you need to see things up close, the golf ball, and then on the putter, and then of course you want to hit it down towards the hole at the end of the golf area. So, but again, this one, people really enjoy these activities. Sometimes they'll start the disease state or the educational section, and then they'll just be like, okay, well, I want to do the golf task, or I want to do the archery task, which is totally fine. And the general feedback is like they've been very impressed with how accurately we have captured, that perceptual experience.
So as you can see from our demo, there's a lot in this app that benefits from being on a VR platform. again, this ability of being able to immerse the users and put them in situations or scenarios that they can't have in real life is just so important for our healthcare audience in deepening their understanding. I know one of them in particular was using VR's spatial benefits to teach about the anatomy of the eye.
Yeah, so typically, you know, in optometry schools, and even if you do an ophthalmology residency or program and the MD route of things, you know, you see all these images, they're 2D images and printed on text, and it just really doesn't capture what's going on optically as well as anatomically inside the eye. So we've got a lot of really good feedback about how being able to actually see, like I say, stick your head inside the eye, but able to see and touch, change the pupil size, you know, play with the ciliary muscle, do all these little changes that are part of this activity, how insightful that was, particularly for younger physicians or opticians, which are kind of the staff that see the patients. So they thought that was very helpful in terms of getting a better understanding of what's happening at an optical or scientific level with presbyopia.
One of the other advantages of VR is being able to like completely control how what the user is seeing all the way in 360. And we took advantage of this when we were simulating the visual acuity, being able to control that. So what we did was we put a blur over their near vision when they're doing this section and gave them control of how much their visual acuity would be blurred in the near vision. And this was actually based off of a real life calculation to guide how much blur to apply. As Weston mentioned, the ETDRS score used generally in a clinical setting drove a lot of these blur calculations. We gave them the slider that they could grab and change what they're seeing from a first-person perspective, but it didn't just end there. We also included this eye anatomy cross-section you can see kind of at the top of the screen that would morph and show the anatomical changes that are happening underneath the surface. So you're seeing what's happening from a patient perspective of, oh, this is what happens you know, with the blur from a first-person perspective, but then also at the same time, you're seeing the corresponding anatomical changes happening under the surface. And this is just going to create this deeper understanding of both what the patient goes through and then also just the everything that's happening with the ciliary muscles. And we were also able to utilize that controlling where the user is at any point in the corrective method simulation. Reading glasses are easy enough to, you know, go down to the store and buy a pair and see what it's like to wear them. What's important here is putting them in a situation, providing interactivity that will really communicate the struggles of having to put on and off the glasses, having to look at from your near to your intermediate to your distance in order to complete the task that we put in front of them. And like reading glasses, bifocals are kind of in the same realm where, you know, not everyone has access to them, but certainly optometrists and their staff can easily enough put on a pair of these bifocals and see what it's like to wear them. Again, it's key to create a situation through interactions and instantly place them somewhere where, oh, I need to do this task, but I'm looking through the wrong lens. Let me look up, do that, I missed. So again, VR is very powerful by being able to enable that type of scenario instantly for the user. And lastly, Monovision is probably the part of this experience that benefited the most from being in VR. This type of corrective method is done usually through a contact lens or even surgery. So it's not very easy to be able to put on that type of glass in real life. You have to go through an invasive procedure. We were able to utilize VR's stereoscopic capabilities in order to apply a different camera effect on each eye, simulating what it's like to have that corrective method. And as Weston mentioned earlier, part of the reason is to gather insight by using this VR solution. And we did this through tracking engagement to help gather those insights. We used our campus dashboard tracking solution, and we collected a few different data points in order to assess how the AbbVie's users would be using this application. So we tracked things like the amount of time spent in the app, which sections were started and completed, as well as interaction data, so like how many times the user is interacting or how they're interacting with an element. And these types of insights, seeing this all in one dashboard, one high-level view, gave your team insights to how is it doing in the field.
Yeah, yeah. So there's a lot of unique insights that come out of this that you don't necessarily get directly from the MSLs themselves. So general feedback like that we've had, of course, of interacting at the medical conferences as well as in the doctor's offices is that they really like the sort of more gamified activities, which is understandable, right? So moving forward, people love the archery test, they like the office scenario, golfing test was fun. Moving forward, we're continuing to develop more of those interactive activities that are sort of more gamified to increase the appeal of this. So, and then typically we'll see that, especially at the congresses where people have a little more disposable time as opposed to in the actual clinic, most of the users will explore some of these modules for about 5 to 10 minutes. So it's pretty good engagement. It's 5 to 10 minutes that we wouldn't have had otherwise necessarily. So
yeah,
it's good.
So thank you so much, everyone, for coming and hearing about our case study. We'd be happy to take questions now or afterwards.
I'll do a quick question. So is this a product? Do you guys intend to sell this? Does it have medical claims associated with it? Or how are you thinking about it in terms of where does it go from here?
As far as the VR activity?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's not a product. We just use it for sort of educational purposes. We do have an FDA-approved drop for presbyopia that is related to all this, but yeah.
Okay, so you think it's connected to the drop, and that was kind of the revenue driver or the link to put them together?
Well, so I mean, in some sense, right? So we're part of what's called the medical affairs team, which is totally separate, right? Yeah, we're part of AbbVie and everything else, but we have no commercial interest in terms of what our team does. But yes, engaging with the doctors, having conversations of a scientific nature, ultimately, yes, it raises awareness, I guess, of the product in some sense. So.
Now, with other customers that we've, because we work with a number of different customers in the pharmaceutical, medical device, life science industry, that has been an approach. Occasionally, is we'll build training for them to educate their customers, and that'll have some sort of licensing fee. It all depends on the need. That wasn't the case here, but we have seen that.
All right. No further questions, it looks like.
Oh,
go ahead.
Oh, no.
Hi, so this is some really fabulous stuff here.
Thank you.
I'm curious, so I know one of the problems that folks face in optometry is doing consistent testing on things other than the basic eye chart, right? Because it can be very hard to build up a consistent scenario across different offices and clinicians, or different clinics rather, to test things like dynamic vision or the ability to search for objects. So do you see this as, you're already collecting some metrics, do you see this as potentially a way to perform those measurements over time?
I think, yeah, something like VR could definitely be used to capture more of the assessments. I don't know who would lead that or how widely adopted it would get. Obviously, as these devices, they've already come down significantly in price. So yeah, maybe in the future that we'll see more of that where you're using some sort of VR devices either in the clinic or at home, getting your own insights, what it's like to do day-to-day things in life. So possibly.
Thank you.
All right, let's give a round of applause for Tipping Point and AbbVie. Really interesting conversation.